Welcome to week 3 of the second season of the Pacific Division Sheltering Capability Building Series. That's a long sentence. We are going to have about 15 sessions this time. Most of the topics have been requested from all of you on the different sessions. They will all be on the same team link. Eway's been doing a wonderful job about sending out reminders, but if you don't get one, just go on the one you used the week before. This meeting will be recorded, and the link will be sent out on Monday with slides. All recordings are also posted on YouTube, and you can search for them in Red Cross Pacific Division on YouTube. Your camera and your mic have been disabled. At the end, we will be doing questions and answers, so please hold your questions until the end. I'm Carol Jansen, and I've been with Red Cross since 2005, I guess. I'm in the Northwest region of the Pacific Division. I'm a reunification and a shelter manager, and I actually am still deployed virtually as call center manager for the call center. And so we're actually still have 4 different DRs we're working, though we haven't seen very many cases at all recently. And we're doing IN still, and California still, and then Alabama and Georgia tornadoes. So the goals for these series is to build our workforce confidence, to provide practical tips for mass care sheltering operations, including lessons learned from IN and other disasters. It's also to provide a networking opportunity for all regions. As I said earlier, if you can put your name and your region in the chat and say hi to each other. This is a good time to kind of just even go through the people on the call and get to know who the other people are in our division that you may be working with someday, and get to know each other that way. We want to welcome back Jody, who I consider my friend and I've worked with on several DRs. She's from Northern California coastal region, and she's going to talk about how to be a great shelter supervisor, part 1, and next week will be part 2. And even if you have no desire to be a supervisor, I recommend taking supervisor classes, learning about what the supervisors do, so then you understand more. If you just want to be an SA and they ask you what something to do, you can understand where supervisor is coming from and what all they're doing. And as we all know, in disasters, they're disasters, and sometimes we may pull some people that with more experience to act as supervisor for that DR only, because we don't have enough. So it's just good to know in general. So Jody, thank you for being willing to lead again, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carol. And I do have to say this is kind of odd because actually my partner in crime, Roxanne Morris, usually does help me do this, and she is on vacation. So I am doing this one by myself. But thank you everybody who is joining us. So I guess let's get started. Next slide, please. So as Carol said, my name is Jody Wallace, and I am part of the San Jose chapter in California, part of NCCR. And I have been a member of the Red Cross since 2005. And like quite a few people that I know, I actually signed up when Katrina hit. I know it actually started, Katrina actually and unfortunately started a Red Cross career for quite a few of us. Next slide, please. So the first thing I thought I want to do is I want to touch base on a few of the basics. several of the operations that we have seen lately, including Hurricane Ian, and even on our floods that we recently had out in California, just kind of reminded us that there are some things that not everybody has fully understands, or perhaps they're not prepared, or it hasn't been explained to them before they deploy. So I thought we just want to touch on a couple of these basics before we get into the sheltering. Hardship codes. If you were with us for the How to Be a Great Shelter essay, we did talk about this. I do want to touch base on it since I know we've got some new people. And this really is a very important topic. A lot of people don't necessarily pay that much attention to the hardship codes when they print out their paperwork for deployment on volunteer connection. Hardship codes are extremely important. They provide us guidance on any potential issues that may be happening on an operation, and we need to give thought to this to make sure that, is it a good time for me to be deploying at this point in the operation? And we need to look at what are our specific needs. Perhaps you're somebody who uses a CPAP and there is concerns that we don't have power, or it may be intermittent power. So it becomes, how are you going to run your medical equipment? Or perhaps we are in a lot of locations, we're doing a lot of walking, we've got hills, our stairs, and if you're someone who has mobility issues, that may become a problem. Also, when we look at forests, the fires that we have, particularly in California, if you're someone who has asthma or other breathing problems, you need to give thought on, is this the right time for me to go out? Now, hardship codes are not meant to discourage anybody, but what it does is it gives you the opportunity to evaluate what is the correct time for you to say that you are available for deployment. And remember, as the operation progresses and services come online, things change, right? So even though you might decide that going out the first 2 weeks doesn't work for you, we're going to need somebody to go out for the second wave. And by then, hey, the power's back on, so my CPAP machine is no longer a problem, right? So we just want you to look at the hardship codes. If you have any questions, please talk to your local workforce people and questions or concerns, and that way you can make a decision based on what your individual needs will be. Next slide, please. And these are just the hardship codes that we are familiar with that you will see. Again, it is never to discourage somebody. We just want you to make sure that when you are agreeing to deploy, it is the right time and the right circumstances to meet your individual needs. Next slide, please. All right, so your assignment as a supervisor actually starts before you even deploy. You want to, or I should say, we encourage you to print and or review the IAP, the Incident Action Plan, which contains a lot of really good information. It has a message from the job director. It gives you the circumstances and how the event came about, take place, gives you an idea of things that are currently happening on the operation, and gives you an idea for the people that are currently at the operation and the positions that they are holding. Now, the IAP is just a snapshot because it is for a 24-hour period, but a lot of the information will not change. How something came about, job director's message, and things like that. But it is just very useful to get an idea of what is going on before we even touch down. Again, right, we want to make sure we are good with the hardship codes. And realize, particularly in the beginning of a large operation, that we usually go with staff shelters, right? You could be sleeping with, 100, 200 of your closest friends and neighbors, right? So you need to pack accordingly. When staff shelters are set up, particularly at the beginning, basically you get a cot and a couple blankets, just like we would provide with a client. So when I deploy, I always am under the assumption I'm going to be sleeping in a staff shelter. I myself I've got a lightweight sleeping bag. I've got a sheet, a light blanket, a small pillow, my own towel, because towels may not be available right from the beginning. And remember, things like pillows are generally donated in the beginning of an operation, so you may or may not have one. So when I'm working with new people, I always say, you need to pack so that you are personally prepared, that if you are in a staff shelter, you have what you're going to need. Remember, this isn't a vacation, right? We're going into a disaster and we're there to help people. So we need to walk in prepared ourselves. Also, particularly as a supervisor, remember that you've got a 50-50 chance of working as the night shift supervisor. And so please pack accordingly. Even if we're in Florida, right, 90 degrees out and it's 90% humidity. When we're working in shelters at night, the air conditioning goes on, people aren't moving around. About 2 or 3 in the morning, it gets extremely cold. So you need to pack, keeping in mind, do I have a sweatshirt or a jacket? And I've got to have long pants, right? We want to give these things thought. So if I come up to you and say, hey, you're my night shift supervisor, you are ready to go and you have clothes that will allow you to be comfortable in that environment. Check the weather, right? Let's see, how's the humidity, or is it cold? Is it snowing? Be aware of these things again to help you figure out how to pack. You always are going to need some type of small notebook, pens, and I recommend a highlighter. And I always tell people, find a notebook that's small enough that either fits in your back of your jeans pocket or perhaps your vest pocket. Larger notebooks are great. They hold more information, but a small notebook means we can literally write questions or things we need to follow up with on the fly as we are walking through the shelter. And if you're somebody like me that you may have medical issues, diabetic or something like that, bring snacks that are going to get you through several days, because as a supervisor, right, we know that shelter, the snacks are usually sweet or salty, a lot of junk food. So if you're someone who has requirements, perhaps you're diabetic, then you know you're going to want to pack stuff so that you can personally get through things without worrying about what am I doing for snacks. Next slide. And as a supervisor, right, we want you to make sure you understand you have Red Cross email. How do you use your email, your Outlook, and the Teams? Mass care procurement card. As a supervisor, we really want everyone to come onto the operation with an MCPC card. Sometimes people are sent out of their chapter without one, but if you are taking a position as a supervisor, please talk to your chapter and say, hey, I know I need one of these cards. Understand it, and also the way it works, reconciling using a 6409. Make sure that you're familiar. The registration forms for the dormitories have changed. They have been shortened. Make sure that you understand the new form. Also, we are doing a lot more via texting nowadays, just for questions, answers, things that are going on. So make sure your texting skills, and also if we are setting you up with a laptop, right? Are you competent? You don't have to be, right? You don't have to be an IT person to do these things. My computer skills are pretty basic, but I can sit down with the laptop. I can, do Excel forms. I can do emails. I can do these types of things. Work schedules, right? You're understanding that we work 12-hour days. That is your shift. That is not counting getting to or from your location that you were working at. as well as we usually are there a few minutes before our shift starts and a couple minutes after our shift ends, so we can do the shift transition, right? So they are long days. We want you to, be aware of this and understand the way it works. Also, last day working, which is not to be confused with what shows up on the paperwork we print off the volunteer connection, right, with our travel instructions. So last day working is something we can talk about maybe later down the road, but it's important that you understand this, so when we're looking at who's got a day off, when do we need to put in requests, how do I explain to my night shift person when their last day working before they go home works. If you're not familiar with some of this and there's somebody that you have a phone a friend, right? Ask that question. Hey, can we talk more about this? Or please feel free to drop me an email or a call. This is one of the things that makes a huge difference in, are we properly staffed, or oops, we've got a problem. Also, understand and have something in your mind on, as a supervisor, you're going to be overseeing the training for your incoming service associates, right? How will you do that? What are the things that are important that you want to make sure that you are teaching them to do? As well as, a lot of times we use EBVs, our event-based volunteers, and they sign up, right? They come in maybe a 4 or 6 hour shift. Have an idea again, what are the things that I'm going to look for them to help us do? Therefore, what are the things I'm going to have to train them on? And then, as we talked a little bit about before, right, operations on night shift, things are done differently as far as task-wise, day shift versus night shift, and we will talk about that as we get a little further down the road. All right, so as a shelter supervisor, right, we have that gap, that SV gap, and that gap allows us to do a couple different things. We can be either the day or night shift supervisor and we are reporting to the shelter manager, or we may be asked ourselves to be a shelter manager, therefore having the day and the night shift supervisors reporting to us. There is a special qualification class that they have been, oh my goodness, encouraging people to take, Mass Care Shelter Site Manager, which is something that you can find under EDGE. And this class goes through, and what they're looking for is that if you have this qualification when you arrive on an operation, then the headquarters sheltering manager should be able to say, these two people over here, okay, these are shelter managers. That gets me started, right? If you're interested in being a shelter manager, I strongly suggest that you look into this class. And remember, just because you deploy as a supervisor does not mean you're going to be assigned as one. With our recent California floods, my first wave that I had in, didn't have a lot of supervisors. My second one, I almost had more than I needed. So there may be times that you're assigned, but you may not be that supervisor. You may be reporting to a supervisor. You may be doing sort of unofficially an SA position, right? That is part of, we're all shelter workers and we all do whatever is asked of us. And remember that field promotions, if you're a supervisor and you're asked to be the shelter manager, a field promotion is good for that operation only. It does not change your gap in volunteer connection. Likewise, if I go out as a supervisor, but I'm not fulfilling that position, that doesn't make a difference on my gap as well. Next slide, please. All right, so now I have arrived at my destination. I'm reporting to headquarters, right? What are the things that I need to know as a supervisor? Well, first of all, I need to understand what my individual role will be, because that's going to determine who I report to, right? If somebody asks me to be the shelter manager, then I will be reporting to the headquarters sheltering manager. If somebody says, hey, I need you to be the supervisor, I will be reporting to a shelter manager, right? So we want to make sure, what is my position and who am I reporting to? And then who is reporting to me? As a supervisor, I'm going to have the SA, the service associates. As a shelter manager, I'm going to have the supervisors reporting to me. The SAs will report to the supervisor, but ultimately they are all under the shelter manager. And then also, what are the things that I need, right? Do we have enough cars for our team? I've got a team of 4. Do I have 2 cars? What do I need? Am I going to need a shelter phone, a computer, a printer? Is this something I can take if I'm opening a new shelter? Perhaps this is something that DST will have to deliver at a different time. But these are the questions that you do want to ask. Next slide, please. Mine didn't do anything. Let's see.
This is the slide of the showing the shelter table of organization is showing now, Jody.
Okay. For some reason, hang tight. Mine, I don't know why mine isn't doing that. Okay. Okay. Well, I do know this in my head. All right. So this is a potential table of organization for a shelter. So I put a site director on here because although this is not something that you always see, if you are at a large shelter, we're talking, you know, several hundred people, or perhaps you have a very challenging shelter. We did have something in California here for our floods recently. And just due to the client population, we actually had somebody who is a site director separate from the shelter manager. Now, every shelter should have a shelter manager, right? And as we talked about, shelter manager will have a day shift supervisor and a night shift supervisor who reports to them. And then your service associates on both shifts will report to those supervisors. Next slide, please. And I don't know why mine is not working. Let's try
Jody,
that.
can you see this? It says supervisor roles in opening, operating, and closing a shelter.
It just kicked in. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
For some reason, it was only showing half of it. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the specific jobs and responsibilities as a supervisor that you have from the beginning of the shelter all the way to the end. So next slide. And let's see if this works. This is a problem. I don't know why mine's not working here. Mine's not switching over to the next page.
Jody, this one says supervisor and shelter manager has a dog. It says teamwork, and I'm going to reshare it to see if that works. So you can continue with the supervisor and shelter manager. And the next slide, it says great supervisor thinks like a manager liaison and also helps ensure daily operations. Let me go ahead and restart.
All right. No pressure here, huh? I can't see things. All right.
I was seeing all the slides as they were being changed. I know with mine, sometimes when the slides don't stop advancing, it has to do with my computer not getting a good signal.
Oh, lovely. And I'm on my
So
iPad.
I hope we don't lose you.
Yeah,
no problem. I'll go ahead and reshare.
I appreciate that. Okay, so let's supervisors and shelter managers. The relationship between those two positions are very important for several reasons. So the shelter manager is responsible overall for everything that happens at the shelter, including shelter team, the clients, and the day-to-day operations. The shelter supervisor is the person that actually helps make those things happen, because the shelter manager needs to be dealing with more of the big picture, right? Working a lot more closely with headquarters as to what's happening. And so we have to depend on our supervisors, both our day supervisors and our night supervisors, to help take care of any issues that we may have, to make sure that things are functioning properly. And so it's really important that there's a good working relationship.
I don't hear Jody anymore.
Jody, I think we lost you. Jody, are you still there?
I'm going to check. So
Okay, in the meantime, let me continue. And pardon me that I'm currently outside. That's why you heard this music. So basically, great
Okay,
supervisor.
can you hear me?
Yes, great. Jody, perfect. Come back on.
All right, sorry about that. All right, so I was just kind of closing saying that it's really important that the relationship between that supervisor and that shelter manager is a strong one. Everybody has different personalities, and there are occasions that you may find that you are butting heads with each other. Make a phone call the HQ sheltering manager and just say, you know, we need to have a conversation about this, because again, your SAs and other people in the shelter are going to look to the shelter manager and the supervisors for guidance. And so it's important that you guys come across as a team. So as a great supervisor, we need to always be thinking like a manager. Look around, anticipate things. Are there issues? Is there something you can take care of? Right? You are the liaison between the service associates and the shelter manager. So you want your SAs to be able to come to you, and then for whatever the issue or question is, you are the person that's going to go to the shelter manager. What we don't want is we don't want every SA running to the shelter manager only because of the duties that the shelter manager has to do. Now, a good shelter manager is always available to everybody, but we do want the SAs to go to their immediate supervisor, and that would be you. Again, as I mentioned, right, a supervisor is there to help ensure that the daily operations run smoothly. Okay, do we have our inventories done? Do we know what we're going to need when the fulfillment trucks come in? Do we have our signage posted? What's happening? We've got UDM. How are we going to handle that? Right? So a supervisor who takes the initiative and looks around and sort of anticipates any issues, right, and brings them up to the shelter manager is invaluable. And again, is
Jody, can you see the next slide?
Right, you want to, yeah. So as a supervisor, you want to make sure you really understand the goings on as you're at your shelter. And I always tell people, look for what I call reluctant supervisors. And I was one of those for many years myself. I always ask everybody, hey, you know, how many shelter deployments have you been on? Reluctant supervisors are people who have a lot of experience under their belt. They're very qualified. Not only are they qualified to be supervisors, in a lot of cases, you know, they could be the shelter manager, but for whatever reason, they don't want to be promoted to supervisor, and they stay as an SA. And that could be a couple different reasons. I always ask questions. And these are a few of the most common reasons that people have told me. One is they just don't want to have to deal with the paperwork. And so what I always say is, I talk to them about, you do not have to be the one who is completing the paperwork. Train a service associate and let them handle it for you. This is what delegation is all about. Sometimes they just don't want to be the person that's in charge. That was me, right? I ran a business. I had employees. I was the boss at home. I wasn't interested in being that when I was out on deployments. But part of it is making sure that they know, look, it's so important that we've got qualified people who understand how things should be done properly, right? Because that way we make sure that the clients and their needs are being met. And a lot of times when you say, look, how about I could use your help because you can help train the newer SAs, they will step up. And they also talk to people about, they know their stuff. Even if they don't want to be a supervisor, they understand what needs to be done. Again, the right way to do things. And so I will say, look, how about being a mentor? How about working with these new people? And that way we're teaching them the right things. It's so much easier to teach new SAs the right way of doing things and why we do those things than trying to break bad habits down the road. And for most of us who've been doing this for a while, right, we run into people that are doing things and now I'm trying to change. Look, I need you to do this because, and the answer will be, well, this is what I was taught, but that's not the right way. Right. So if you can get some of these, as I said, I call them reluctant supervisors to help mentor some of the people. And I go out enough that there's probably at least 6 or 8 of these people. And if I see them coming in on my arrival roster, I know I can tap them for help. Next is the relationship between the supervisors and the service associates. Again, your associates are going to report to you. This is the opportunity, right? Teach them, particularly your newest ones, how you do something and why, right? Sometimes people look and they're like, well, this doesn't make any sense to me. Explain why we do things the way we do and empower your team, right? I always tell people, this is the task that I need done. Right? I don't want to be micromanaged and I don't like to micromanage people. So I will say, hey, I need this done. Let me know when it is, right? Empower your team, give them something to do. Tell them, hey, let me know if you have any problems. And if not, tell me when the task is completed, right? People want to feel that we're treating them as adults and we're not micromanaging them. And this is the way that you do it. So be a role model, lead by example, right? I know that there's a saying, something about, do the right thing even when no one is looking, okay? As a supervisor, people are looking towards you, what you do, how you do it, how you interact with the clients, how you interact with other groups, other gaps that may be in there, and how you interact with your own team. And people will model that behavior. Always be approachable, right? Make sure people know if there's a question, if there's a problem, that is what you are there for. You are there to help them figure it out. You are there to have their back, right? And remember, there's no such thing as a bad question, just bad answers, right? If somebody asks you something, it's really important that you make sure that you are sharing the correct information with them. And keep your team informed. There may be things that the shelter manager says, hey, I'm telling you this, but we're not announcing it, but I just want you to kind of know about it. Okay, that's something we keep to ourselves for the time being. Outside of that, keep your team informed, right? What are the changes that we may be doing, or what are things that may be happening? Hey, we are going to have the shelter resident transition team maybe coming in, or hey, somebody's going to be coming to do a barbecue, or hey, this isn't working, so we need to figure out a new way to do this. Make your team feel that they are part of the team, right? We want people to go home off an operation and feel that they learned something, that they were part of something that was very special. And a good supervisor can do that, even in tough times, right? And remember, right, as a supervisor, you are responsible for evaluations, and you are responsible for good and quality evaluations. And we're going to talk about evaluations as we get farther down. But a couple quick things to remember regarding evaluations. So I was talking about carrying that little notebook in your pocket, right? As soon as that shelter opens, even as soon as you are setting it up, pay attention, start taking notes, right? What did someone do well? I'm looking around and I'm like, wow, Jane took and started pulling up and setting up those cots right off the bat, right? Didn't wait to be told what to do. Look and see what people are doing right. Maybe you notice that this person always handles the trash without being asked, right? Likewise, make notes of things that people will need to work on improvement, right? But we always are going to make sure when it comes to areas of improvement, we have to address the behavior, but not attacking the person. So again, 2 weeks is a long time. Start jotting down things, start paying attention to what people are doing. As they say, catch somebody doing something right. One of the toughest parts about being a supervisor or a shelter manager or anything else is, you know, we run into issues with volunteers, right? People have bad behaviors. We have problems with people. You need to handle it when something happens, right? You need to make sure that for whatever the incident is, you have taken that person, you have gone off somewhere and had a conversation with them about the behavior, what needs to change. It's really important, as they say, that we don't kick the can down the road. I've seen many instances of supervisors who say, I don't deal with confrontation well, let someone else, deal with it. So what happens is that somebody's bad behavior, it's acceptable, right? Nobody corrected it at the time. And so they think that it must be okay, right? You don't want to send somebody who's got issues or inappropriate behavior to another operation and another supervisor for them to take care of it. Not everybody is comfortable doing this, right? And sometimes in particular, if it's somebody that you know and you might have worked with before. If you have a situation that you need to handle regarding someone's behavior and you're just not sure, you're not comfortable, or you're not sure the right way to do it, then you go to your supervisor, who's the shelter manager, and you say, I need help. Because the shelter manager has got your back. Again, that person is still part of the shelter manager's team. We want to do what we can to correct that behavior there, right? We don't want it to go farther than this operation. Next slide.
Can you see the slide?
No, I even
I
changed.
see the slide. I do not hear Jody. Are you?
So mine's still sitting on 6.
So it is switched again.
So it's relationship between supervisors and clients. You know, Jody, it might be easier for you to open your slide yourself on your Teams. Then you can present that way and you can tell me when to go forward and I can just go forward to show everybody else. Can we do that?
And Jody, if we do lose you again, I will text you. Oh, and if you don't answer, I will call you, just so you know. So if I call you, it's because we lost you. We may have done. Jody, are you there?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
This is the worst part when it doesn't go according to plan. All right, so we're looking at, make sure I'm looking at the correct slide. Relationship between supervisors and clients, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
All right. So as a supervisor, your job, right, your responsibility, as we talked about, is how the shelter, how things are running, how things are working with your clients. Interact, get to know your clients. As I had talked about before on the Roxanne and I had on the previous one on how to be a great shelter SA, get to start knowing a few people by their names, right? You're not going to necessarily know everybody, but being able to address somebody by their name says that you are recognizing them as a person. They're just not a number and a statistic in your shelter. And saying, good morning, Joe, or how are you, Mary, really goes far. They hear it. So does their family. So does their friends. So does your shelter team, right? You are showing that you are recognizing that person and you're making them feel important. Again, be friendly, be approachable to them. If somebody asks you a question and you don't know the answer, say you don't know it, but you will get back to them, right? Again, if you say I will find out and get back to you, you need to make sure that you do. You need to follow up with those answers because your word carries weight. Same thing as far as making sure that your information is correct. Because if you tell me something, then I'm under the assumption that you know what you're talking about, and that's the information that I am going to work with. So please make sure in the heat of the moment and you're busy that you don't just pop off with an answer if you're not sure it's correct. People will have a lot more respect for someone who says, I'm not sure, but I promise I will find out. And, right, how are we going to keep our clients updated and informed? We make sure we've got signage that says these are the shelter rules. We hold daily meetings, usually in the evening, right? Because that's when more people are there. This picture right here, actually, I was in a shelter in a Quonset hut in Texas in the middle of the summer. They had no fans, no air conditioning. It was probably 90 degrees at 12:30 at night. And these little girls, their mom, there was 4 kids. Their parents were exhausted. These 2 little girls were just still, amped up. It was hot. So I actually took them out of bed and we went and we sat on the floor and we read a couple books. The next morning, the mom just came up and said, thank you so very much, because she had an infant, right, that she was trying to get to sleep. And it was hard when his big sisters wouldn't go to sleep themselves. It wasn't a big deal, right? I had a good time with the girls, but it made an impact on the parents. And that really, right, that says a lot. Next slide. All right, this actually seems like a good place to stop. Next week, we can start talking about the individual responsibilities as shelter supervisor. So before we get started at this point, this kind of seems like something we will roll into next week. Does anybody have any questions?
And if we didn't answer your question in the chat, feel free to come off of mute and ask it again. We tried to keep up with the chat. But if you have a question, either raise your hand or just come off of mute.
Or even just a comment. What is practices for shelter meetings? We're going to actually cover that next week. but I can talk about that in a minute. So I always look at a shelter meeting as this is the opportunity for a two-way dialogue, right? Not only am I making sure that the clients know what my expectations are, right? It's their opportunity to come back to me. So even if I don't have anything new to share, maybe I'm just reiterating the rules, right? Hey, and making sure people know, you can't smoke out here, you can go here. I usually run my meetings about 7 o'clock at night, right? Kind of as the shifts are changing and more people are there. But it gives clients the opportunity to ask questions or to voice concerns or complaints that they have. And one of the biggest disservices that we do, and some of the biggest unhappiness that clients have expressed, is the fact that they don't feel we're hearing them. So by having a daily shelter meeting, again, even if I'm just reiterating the rules and I have nothing new to say, I'm giving them the opportunity to come to me and say, I have a problem, or I have a complaint, or, we appreciate what you guys are doing, right? But make sure that you're not blowing that off, because a lot of times people get busy and they don't do those meetings, but it makes a huge difference, and it'll make a difference as far as the cooperation from your clients. If you need help with something, right, and people feel that we are hearing them and we're trying to take care of them, people will say, hey, you know what, I'll take care of the trash for you, or what can I do to help? So I always look at a shelter meeting as a way to continue to build goodwill.
And Kathy has a question. You want to come off of mute, Kathy?
Yes. I was wondering, I watched the previous presentations, and it talked about a mass care webinar every third Thursday of the month. How do we get that link to be able to go to that?
Yue?
Yeah, so I'll post the link again on here. But for February, the meeting has been canceled because we're standing down for the national operation. So the meeting will be resuming in March. I'll post the link again. It's a form. You enter your name, your region, your email, and it will be added to the mailing list. And if you have any trouble, you can just shoot me an email and I'll go ahead and register you. And I think Lori has another question as well.
Yes, I do. I don't know if you can hear me. I've never done this before. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, I'm getting new to this. So, this is a little bit on the side here, but I received, let's see. I took all the classes for the shelter supervisor, and then I followed the instructions from the engagement lead. And then, I guess I'm just waiting to see. I was encouraged to go get shelter supervisor classes done. So what I'm asking you guys is there a way to do like a job shadow? Because even though I've done 4 deployments, I don't feel comfortable becoming a supervisor unless I have an ability to be able to have a shadowing situation.
So, you know what my suggestion would be is when you go out in your deployment, you go and you're in the shelter situation, approach the shelter manager, or you can approach whoever the supervisor is and say, I think I'm ready to, I'd like to consider becoming a supervisor, but I really would like to kind of shadow and get a better idea of how things are done or what things are done. And I don't really know anybody that's going to tell you, no, we don't want you to do that. Because good shelter supervisors are always, always needed. And I would much rather have somebody who says, I'm interested in learning this. then again, making assumptions. So speak up in the next time that you're out and say, hey, you know, I'd like to shadow this person. And the other thing is that supervisor may say, hey, you know what, great. I'd like you to take over doing this, this, and this. Now, remember, of course, every shelter is going to have its own nuances, right? But it's the big important steps that we're doing that are duplicated shelter to shelter. But people will appreciate that you're saying this and you want to be able to learn more about this, right? But you need to be the one to initiate it. Does that help?
Yes, it does help. One of the main questions I have, and I appreciate that very much, is how does one get trained for all of the paperwork that is required? Because I understand that that's a big, important part of the job. And I don't know how I mean, I understand they have to, you know, have so many registration forms and how do they count them and the snacks and stuff like that. But I don't know the all-encompassing, like a checklist that says, these are the 10 things that a shelter supervisor must address every time they're deployed.
Well, okay, and that's legitimate. So I will say that in some ways, some of the stuff that's required, some of the requirements are less, but we have put additional things into place. Registration forms have gotten easier. That's a matter of sitting down and being able to work at the registration desk. The requirements for what we call heads to beds, which we will be talking about more next week, the requirements are different because now we're counting clients and new registrations and pets. So again, we'll be talking about this a little bit next week. All I can really say again is it's one of those things you go to the shelter and you say, I want to see about learning this, right? And if you see somebody doing something, ask the question, hey, what are you doing? What is this used for? Again, every supervisor is going to sort of have their own way of doing things. But a lot of what we're doing, keep in mind, is it's just people managing, if you would. I always consider that the biggest thing that I do. I'm a people manager, right? It's how are we handling issues? How are we handling problems? A lot of troubleshooting. The paperwork stuff, to be honest, I think in a lot of ways is easier. It's just the people stuff.
So that makes a lot of sense. So question then, is there an actual visual checklist that one can download that they take with them to the DR that they can make, you know, so they have a visual visual representation?
I just posted in the chat.
There we go. Yeah, so you can follow the link that Iwe put in the chat. Again, things change a lot. Things can be very fluid. But I think once you actually start doing some of this stuff, you will find that it's not as complicated or as much as you anticipate. Most of this stuff is pretty easy. It's just a matter of understanding what it is used for and how do we gather and share the data.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate your help.
My pleasure. Anything else?
Okay, I do have one more question. So today,
Okay.
I spent 3 hours. I was trying to join. I've been a Red Crosser for 5 years, and I am now being able to have a calendar that's opened up for me to be able to participate in Red Cross meetings and so on and so forth. And almost all of your guys' meetings, whether it's you or logistics or whoever it is, have all your meetings connected through the Microsoft Teams. And I normally put all of my calendar events on the Google Calendar, and I'm not able to, it seems like, click on the Google Calendar and be able to join this chat, for example, this meeting. So for example, tonight, I was not available for 12 minutes trying to join you and I couldn't do it.
I'm not the girl for that one. Is anybody out there as far as techie wise?
I can assist with that. I can assist with that. In order to use your Google Calendar, what you have to do is you have to copy the link from the email that eWay sends out and post that into the notes section of your Google Calendar under the date it is that you need to have it put into. So if the date was today and you got the email, the reminder email yesterday, you would go in, you would copy the link and put it inside the notes section of your Google Calendar for that day. And then once the message comes up, all you have to do is it'll send you a message, you click on the link, and it will bring you right into the meeting.
What do you mean the note section? 'Cause I'm
When
not-
eWay sends out a reminder, there's a link inside the email. If you put your finger on it, it'll ask you to copy it. You click copy. Then when you go into your Google Calendar and you open it up, say for today, it'll show on the open your day. If you click on more, it will also bring down everything else that is listed. You'll have several, you can put in dates, times, notes. Under the notes section, if you tap on the notes section and you hold your finger onto it, it will ask you if you want to paste. You click on the paste. And
Who's
that
your
will
email
put-
carrier? Is it Hotmail, Yahoo, Gmail? Who's your email?
It doesn't matter.
So
Courier.
you guys, so this sounds like something that maybe a couple of you guys might want to take offline and provide assistance on. I know that we're like about 3 minutes till, so maybe you could hook up off of this. I just don't want everybody to stay if they've got other things that they need to do, but I know that this is important. I just want to say, so thank you to you guys that have participated tonight. Next week, we're going to basically start going over specific tasks that we do start to finish on opening, operating, closing the shelter, as well as a bunch of other information. So I'm hoping you guys will join me again next Wednesday. And I thank you for your time.
Jody,
Okay.
let's take 2 more questions. We have Debbie's question and Rose, then we'll
Okay.
close the session.
Okay.
This is Debbie. My question is, you're talking about a meeting with the client's resident at 7. Is that like 7 a.m., 7 p.m.? And how do you get how do you do this? At the Hertz Arena, we had all the people inside the arena, and then we had all the people on the hallway and the annex outside. How do you hold a meeting? Where do you hold it? And how do you speak loud enough that you've got 500 noisy people plus kids hearing it? What's the format you would suggest using for something like that?
Okay, so a couple things. So my first one is I always do my meeting in the evening. So I say, 7:30, depends on if the supervisor's doing it or the shelter manager, but 7:30 in the evening, because I'm going to have the most number of clients that are at the shelter. And your point is valid. What about when you are at a really large place and you've got inside clients, outside clients? In that case, what I've done is hold multiple client meetings, right? They don't have to be super long, but so let's say hypothetically that if I've got, several hundred clients between inside and outside, maybe the shelter manager and day shift supervisor, they're going to split up inside and they're going to both split the client, and I will take this side of the room or the dorm, you're going to take this. And maybe the night shift supervisor and one of the SAs that the night shift supervisor is working with, they're going to go outside and do the same thing. Now, safety is always really important. So sometimes I can't do meetings at night, all right? And I do the best that I can. If I'm in a well-lit parking lot and I have people that are interested, I like to try and do something. I've worked at fairgrounds to where the people outside don't want to have anything to do with me, and I will respect that, right? So maybe I end up doing my client meetings only with my clients that are in the dormitories. Again, use your shelter manager, your day supervisor, night supervisor, and if you're at a large place, you'll probably have a site manager, and sort of split things up so that you've got multiple groups. As long as your agenda, you guys all agree on the topics that you're talking about, right? I think you can share the information. If you have clients who have issues or complaints, you write them down and say, I will be talking to the shelter manager. I will come back with answers tomorrow. So there is not a set way to do this. We kind of do it the best that we can. But I think the key is that we're trying to keep the lines of communication open. And I think most people will have more respect for the fact that we're trying to do it, even if it isn't, done perfectly.
I think that is all the questions. Was there any more questions? If not, I want to thank everybody for attending. Please make sure that you log an hour in Volunteer Connection for attending this meeting. And Jody will finish the session next Wednesday. So see you all back next week. Thank you all.
Thank you.